So instead, Robson plays d5. So now we're getting into more of a Grunfeld position. cd, knight takes, e4, knight c3, bc. So here we have like a normal exchange Grunfeld, but with the moves f3 and knight c6 thrown in. And this is kind of an interesting trade-off because f3 doesn't seem like it's so useful for white, but on the other hand, black can't play c5, which he would normally do, because his knight is blocking. There is, however, a line where black plays knight c6 anyway, instead of c5, so it would seem that maybe black would have a favorable version of that line. But in this game, Jobava plays a very aggressive plan that works out quite well. Now, this position was actually seen in a very high-level game, about the highest that you can have, between the world champion and the world's highest-rated player, although he was not at the time. There was a game between Anand and Carlsen, where here Carlsen played e5, which is maybe the best move, and then Anand played bishop e5. Maybe he didn't want to play d5, because then this bishop might still emerge here at some point. So bishop e5, bishop d7, knight e2, bishop g7, bishop e3, castles, d5, knight a5, bishop d3. So we have a typical Grunfeld structure. e6, castles, knight b7. So the knight can go to d6. Black actually ended up playing c5, and they got a structure like this. And later, Carlsen actually put his bishop back here and here. And white has d5, but, black has c5 for his knight. And the game was a pretty short draw. But black seemed, for the most part, okay. So that's another way to continue, and maybe time will tell if it's better to play e5 immediately. In the game, Robson played bishop g7, which is certainly the most natural move. Bishop d3. Normally in the exchange variation, white plays bishop to c4, but here he doesn't really need to go to c4. He can go to d3 because the d4 pawn doesn't really need any extra protection. And this way, if black plays knight a5, it won't be with tempo. Castles, knight e2, and here Robson played b6. Now this position's been reached a couple times. There was a game just a couple years ago between Lalich and Pergar, who is only about like a 2100 player, where black played e5, d5, knight e7. Maybe knight a5 is actually the right square. But here black tried to play it like a King's Indian, but after c4, f5, castles, queen d6, queen b3, then bishop a3 is coming. And white's kind of queenside and central play is much more important than anything black's doing on the king side. Black doesn't really have any attacking chances. So another way to play, it was a game that was back in 2002 between Sweetheart and Urban, like a 23 and a 2400 player. Went knight a5, bishop a3, b6, castles, c5. This is a good pawn sacrifice and very kind of typical. And after dc, which probably isn't even so great, queen c7, good move. This is typical pawn sack for black. cb, ab. Black has very good play on the c and a files in return for the pawn. And, also like possibility of kind of biting down on the c4 square. Like already the knight can come here. Black can also play like bishop e6 and a rook to c8. Maybe a rook to d8 and put some uncomfortable pressure here. And black very quickly got the upper hand. The pawn is not worth taking. However, in this game, after knight a5, instead of bishop a3, which tries to stop c5 but doesn't, maybe white could try a plan like we see in the game with just h4. Would be interesting try. Although black might be a little bit better off here than there, but this is definitely a more dangerous idea. So in the game, Robson played b6, so this could lead to similar play. Like if white castles, black will play knight a5 and c5 at some point. But instead, Jobava plays h4. Robson plays knight a5. He could try to stop this pawn with h5, but the king side is still a little frail. And maybe white will still play like knight f4 and e5, and there's some pressure on g6. And, g4 is a possibility. white, can also still just play like maybe like bishop g5 and queen d2 with the idea of bishop h6, and a lot of different ways to attack the king side. Another idea would maybe be to strike in the center with e5, but then after d5 followed by h5, white still has decent chances, I think. But Robson decided to strike with c5, which is typical. Knight a5, h5, c5, hg, hg. And now Jobava makes an interesting move that ends up giving him good attacking chances. And in this game, one thing about it, it's very difficult to tell where black made like a decisive mistake. I think it's actually really hard to defend black's king side here because of the delay and the pressure on d4. Like, black has finally achieved c5, but he's had to play the move b6, and he's also played knight c6 to a5. So then if he goes back to attack the center, then he took, 3 moves to put the knight on c6, and white will use all those moves to further his attack. So here he plays what I think is a very good move. He plays e5. So cd, cd, and now it's hard to figure out how black should continue. He could do bishop b7, but the bishop doesn't do too much there. In this game we see this move f3 ends up helping white. He could play bishop e6 with the idea of trying to use this square, like a typical plan in the Grunfeld. Black wants to play knight c4 or maybe just bishop c4. But white has a very interesting attacking move here, which I think is quite dangerous if he plays queen to d2. A very funny looking move, but this idea of playing queen f4 to h4 and then bishop h6 is very hard to meet. And it's all because it's hard to create counterplay in the center. Look, white's not really developing his pieces in such a normal way, but, he has to open h-file and he's just going for mate. So very difficult for black to defend. Robson played knight c6, attacking the d-pawn, but this allows bishop e4, which is annoying. So he played queen d7, and he does this because he wants the possibility of developing the bishop to a6 to attack the knight on e2 to increase the pressure on d4. But it ends up being too slow. Again, it's difficult to offer advice to black, I found in this game. But this is one thing that kind of made me interested in this game, is it's a wipeout, but it's really hard to figure out what black did wrong. Maybe just the whole thing with castling and then b6 is just too slow. There are some lines in the Grunfeld where black doesn't play c5 and he does like b6 or knight c6 instead, where white does try h4. But here white just feels like he's up some tempi. King f2 was played. It was also possible maybe to just play like bishop h6 straight away. Maybe he wanted to wait to do this because he really wants the queen in front of the rook, but it still looks pretty strong. He played king f2 first. This also has maybe the possibility of playing like queen g1 to h2. Looks quite dangerous if he could pull it off. Bishop a6, so this is kind of the natural follow-up to black's play. But now white, he delivers mate rather quickly by going in a different direction. Very interesting. When I saw this move, I thought, all right, so white's not going to try to mate. But he played queen a4. So this is quite strong, because double attack here, and if he takes on e2, then white throws in bishop takes c6. So bishop b7 is forced, but maybe black feels like he has some success because he lured white's queen to the wrong side of the board. But we'll see it's a very short road to the king side. Bishop h6, rook a to d8, looks natural, but maybe he has to find another move here, though I can't find anything good. Now, very good move. This pawn is attacked, and white not only doesn't protect it, but he unprotects it with queen a3. And suddenly we see this route to the king side. So Robson takes knight takes d4. This move loses, but the only move that like the computer would try here to defend is like f5 to try to make a little room. But even after ef, rook takes, queen e3. It doesn't seem like black has any kind of reasonable way to defend his king side. So let's see, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So knight takes d4, bishop takes g7, And now he recaptures on g7. If he does knight takes e2, white can just take on f8 and just be up material and keeps the attack. He could also maybe throw in rook a d1. They both seem to win very convincingly. So king takes g7, queen e3. And now the tactical problem for black is if he plays rook h8, which would normally be the move to defend, just rook takes rook. If he takes with the king, then rook h1 and queen h6. And if he takes with a rook, then the knight on d4 is just hanging. So white can just take it and have a free piece. So there's no good defense. Also, if he plays knight f5 to try to cover this square, then very simple. Bishop takes f5 wins. And this pawn on e5 also really helps with the attack because the king has no escape square. So he played f5, but this is just desperate and loses by force. Queen h6, king f7. This is a forced win, but when I checked it, it seemed like Jobava just played all perfect moves. Queen h7, king e6, queen takes g6, king takes e5. King is really too far out there. Black's not even up a piece or anything. He's up a pawn, but rook a d1. This is a very good, quiet move that's quite crushing. If he ever takes on e4, there's even like rook h5 check. So this just ties everything down. Rook g8, f4 check. This leads to forced mate. King takes e4, knight c3, king takes f4, rook h4, king e5, and rook e1 check. And black had to give up. So this is a very convincing game in this line and shows a way that white can attack in the Grunfeld and really shows how you need to have counterplay in the center in order to survive an attack like this. This is the reason that white's attack succeeded, as black could not do anything in the center. So players of the black side of this line will really have to take this plan with h4 very seriously, which hasn't really been seen so much over the board, but now it will have to be scrutinized. So hope you enjoyed this little miniature, very quick and clean game from Jobava, and we'll see you next time on chesslecture.com.